SanteeSwapper. I'm filming this video for my Scouting Hot Finds Insiders. One of the exclusive pieces of content that I promised you was a short thing called Inside the Warehouse. Now, kind of the concept here is that if you're a Scouting Hot Finds Insider, you might be a little more curious than the average person about what's going on in my business as a scouting memorabilia dealer. And so I wanted to kind of record some videos that show you what's kind of going on inside the warehouse, inside my business. And so what I've got for you today is kind of a report on a collection that I bought recently. I actually mentioned this collection in my Hot Finds newsletter and a little bit on Facebook, but honestly I was a little coy about it because it was something that I felt like buying this collection was such a big deal for me that probably the less that I said the better. So if you might remember from a Hot Finds newsletter, if you heard me talking about going to buy a collection from the Central Time Zone, that keeps it pretty generic, right? Then this is the collection that I bought. And I'm happy to show the insiders what I got. I don't really want to put this out there for everybody on YouTube, but this collection is one of the biggest that I've ever gotten. And as you'll see, one of the ones that I'm honestly most excited about. So I wanted to share with my insiders. Okay, so here's the backstory. I reached out to a man who had posted that he had a collection from a family and he was trying to help them to sell it, just kind of a vague thing. But we exchanged phone numbers. I got to talking to him and he sent me pictures of the collection. Turns out this collection had basically been on ice since 1976. Now, I'm 48 years old. I was born in 1973. So this collection had literally not been touched since I was 3 years old. That really got me intrigued. But what really got me excited was when I saw the pictures that this was an OA collection that was in frames. And I'll show you in just a second the frames. To me, these are also a really big pickup with this collection. So as you can kind of imagine, what happened was there was lots of phone calls back and forth, pictures exchanged. I made an offer on the collection and the family agreed to the deal. I then drove to go get it. Now this was quite an adventure. I had to drive about 6 hours, and with my planning I decided I would go the night before and spend the night in another town so that I would basically be pre-positioned, if you will, to go pick it up. But unfortunately I had car trouble and the alternator in my car died. Luckily, I kind of saw the warning lights coming on and I had already decided to drive through Columbia, South Carolina, which would take me really close to a lot of my old college buddies. And so a good friend of mine, thank you, Colin Crick, bailed me out. He met me at the, this was the Lexington, South Carolina post office where my car had died at night. This is like, 8 o'clock at night. And my friend Colin actually not only agreed to come bail me out, he got the car towed to his mechanic. He loaned me his mom's car so I could keep going on my trip. Just unbelievable. In fact, to finish that part of the story, the car was fixed the next day. And when I arrived back in Columbia from picking up the collection, I was able to trade off cars with Colin and drive my own fixed car home, which was quite an amazing thing. So you really want to know about the collection. Let me tell you. So this guy had collected OA flaps, and really he was focused on maybe a classic name number set. When I got the collection, what I could see was that some of the frames, he had set them out and had Lodge 1, Lodge 2, Lodge 3, all the way through the numbers. And where there was a case where there was a flap either he didn't have, he left a blank spot, or if there was a lodge that didn't have an issue, he actually left a blank spot in the frame and he even said, we wrote with a Sharpie, no issue, which was kind of interesting. I'll show you the frames in a minute. So there were about 5 of these frames maybe that contained the OA name number set. And then interestingly enough, what he had done with the other pieces was he had filled the other frames with all of his duplicates, which to me is a little odd that you would want to do that because it's really, when you think of duplicates, you think of things you're going to trade or sell or swap around. But he, permanently mounted his duplicates in frames, and those duplicates really were not a rhyme or reason. It wasn't like he had all of one particular state, although sometimes he did have certain states together, but he had just frames and frames and frames and frames full of flaps. So altogether, I have not counted it yet. I believe there to be between 1,500 and 1,800 OA pieces in this collection. And honestly, this is kind of what I say about this collection. This is the collection that I always wanted to find. Basically, I knew that back in the day, there were people who are real big collectors in our hobby. Almost all those collections have been broken up, sold all through the time. But what happened in this case was, sadly, this gentleman died in 1976. He had a heart attack, as I understand from the family. My friend Colin also told me he doesn't like when I talk about all the sad details, but I think it's part of the story, so let me just tell you. He passed away in 1976, and his family just kept the collection in the house, in the family. Now the family, as I understand, did have an offer after he passed to sell the collection. They declined, and then after that things kind of went in hibernation. So his widow lived for a long, long time after that, many, many, many years. Eventually she moved to a different town to be closer to her children, and she took the collection with her. I guess it just stayed in a closet or wherever. And then when she passed away, then the children were dealing with the collection, and then that's when they decided to find someone who was interested in buying it. So that's how it came to me. So again, I say this was a collection I always wanted to find because this was a classic collection where the guy had done tons of old-fashioned trading through the mail. In fact, when I got the collection, it included copies of his needs list. It had his name, and you could just tell these were like mimeographed copies. And so these were things he was mailing out to people as he was trading through the mail. He also had a huge stack from his home lodge of their flaps. So from the area that he was from, he had 3 or 4 flaps that he had literally 40 or 50 or 100 of each. And that was his trading stock. And it was a pretty good looking patch. And so he did tons of trading. So this was really, really cool for me to land this collection. Now the timing for this collection couldn't have been better. I say that because in the last year, I really started focusing on organizing my own collection of Order of the Arrow flaps, name numbers, I guess you would say. Probably, honestly, just in the last 3 or 4 months, I've really put a lot of time into this. And so I literally have been going on eBay and buying flaps that I needed for my collection. I organized everything. I created a label system. I printed labels. I was bagging and tagging and working with a spreadsheet and really focusing on what were the patches that I didn't have. And what I'm trying to do is collect one lodge flap from every lodge that ever issued a flap. So I'm not really focused on lodges that only had some kind of an odd shape and that's all they ever had, or maybe they had a neckerchief and that's all they ever had. You know, when it's your collection, you really get to decide what the rules are. And so for me, I am kind of an OA flap collector. That's what I grew up doing. And so when it comes to my OA name and number set, I am choosing to only pick lodges that had flaps. And that's what I'm focusing on. Now there are still some really, really tough flaps to get from lodges like Tomahawk or Beluga or Zingwhack or Kamidashi. I'm going to pronounce that wrong. There's several lodges that only issued a flap, and that one flap is the only issue, and it's super hard, etc., etc. But here's where I am with this collection. When I got this collection, I probably had 30, 40, 50 needs. I still haven't quite finished that total to narrow it down. But in this collection, I think there are maybe upwards of 24 needs in this collection that I can then pull and put in my collection. Ironically, most of the patches that I bought on eBay from people like Gene Cobb and Scout Patch Collector, you know, even Roger Ward, if you can believe that, I bought something from him. I probably, if I could roll the tape back 3 months, I wouldn't have needed to bought any of those because I got the same flap or a better issue one in this collection. So, oh well, I'm a reseller, so I will just put those back out into the market. So what I'm going to do now is literally today after I film this video, I've got all of the patches taken out of the frames. They're behind me. Kind of show you how I did this. So in this box, this is 1 through 99. It's very scientific. These are all the OA patches from this collection that are from lodges 1 through 99. And I have boxes behind me for then 100 to 200 and so forth and so on. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to organize them all in exact OA lodge number order so I can then go through and compare it to my collection that I've already bagged and tagged. What I'm probably going to do is more favor these patches from my permanent collection. One reason for that is because I kind of have this nostalgia thinking that these patches came out of a frame. I know for sure they were displayed at scouting events. I can tell by the wear and tear on the frames that these things were well traveled. And so I sort of feel like these patches were meant to be displayed. The other piece of this is when I was organizing my name number collection recently, I went through and made notes about which patches were maybe sewn or which ones had glue on the back, things like that. And of course, my sort of goal in mind was, oh, I should try to upgrade, make sure that I have the most mint condition patch to go in the frame. But now my thinking has kind of changed. What I saw in this collection was, I don't know that this gentleman did it, but there are a number of flaps in this collection that have glue on the back. And it wasn't that he glued them in the frame. That wasn't what he did. He actually used tape and staples, but that's another story, to secure them to the frame, two double-sided tape. And that double-sided tape really didn't cause a lot of problems. There's a little bit of sticky residue, but nothing like a stain or anything. And so now I sort of have these flaps that I think present really, really well on the front, but might have some glue on the back. And I think I've kind of come around to the idea that I would almost rather display those patches than try to sell them and keep one in there that's completely mint. Because really, if it's a display like this guy did, the front is what matters. You're trying to share the patches, you're trying to share the history. And so I'm just not going to lose sleep over the fact that something nobody can see on the back of the patch, there's a little bit of glue from God knows when somebody glued it into an album. I don't think that's what this guy was doing, but I'm sure that happened a lot back in the 60s and 70s when he was collecting. And so he was getting these patches through trades that had glue in the back. So anyways, I'm just going to make a note on my spreadsheet in the collection, whether or not it came from this collection and whether or not it has glue on the back, you know, what the condition is. But I'm perfectly happy to use those. So anyways, what I'm going to do today, again, organize all these. I don't think I'll have time today to start going through and swapping them out. That'll be sort of a two-step problem, but it's a great problem to have. Like I said, 1,500, maybe 1,800 flaps behind me in these boxes. I already know some of them are absolute killer flaps. I know there are both issues of the Guam Lodge. I think it's HSN. I'm not quite sure how you want to pronounce that. He has the S1 and the S2. I know that's a great, great issue. I know there is, even from my own lodge, this was the thing that really struck me about this lodge, or this collection. If you were going to have a flap from my home lodge, Santee Lodge, and you were a collector in the 1960s and 70s, the flap that you would have is our classic S2, which was issued, I think, for like 11 years. So very, very common flap. Even all these years later, they're not hard to find. Maybe they sell for 40, 50, 60 bucks on eBay, depending on who has it for sale. You would assume that's the flap he would have in his name number set for this collection. But oh no, he didn't have that one. He had what in Blue Book is called the QS1, which we call the double black. It was a lodge flap in 1969 that came back from Lion Brothers with the wrong color border on it. And so the lodge mailed them back to the manufacturer to kind of get a refund and to get their correct order. Of course, you know how this story goes. Then the patches get distributed somehow, given away as samples, whatever, they don't get destroyed. And so they get out. And so this has always been one of the coolest flaps from my home lodge. Number one, because you never find it in local collections. No one was ever sold at our camp. No one was ever sold at our trading post. They probably were dispersed and got out at jamborees and traded around. And so it's always been a really, really hard flap to find for people in my lodge. Now it's like a $500 or $600 flap. So it's a great piece. Now, when I talk about money, I should tell you, I paid a lot of money for these patches. It was not one of those things where, you know, the family didn't know what they had or whatever. I mean, they'd held on to these for a long, long time. And they were offered a lot of money for this collection back in 1976 and turned it down. So it really was one of these things where it wasn't like I was going to buy the collection on the cheap. I paid a lot of money for this collection. And so it is what it is. But now I'm in the stage where I want to sort it and try to recoup my money. The other thing I want to show you in this video, and I'm going to wrap this up because I know I'm going long, I want to show you the frames. And honestly, I know it sounds very weird, but part of the reason why I got really excited about this collection was once I saw the frames and realized how many of them there were, I saw in my mind that I had solved another problem, which was I have always wanted to have patches in frames that I could then either hang up on the wall, but also take to scouting events and set up a pop-up museum, whether it be at a blue and gold banquet or an Eagle Scout Court of Honor or a lodge banquet, whatever. And these frames are just perfect for that. I'll show you them next. All right, here are the frames. And I can tell you that it took several weeks to strip all the patches out of the frames. There were some loose patches in this collection, but really the key things were all in these frames. Here's the cool thing about them. These panels are basically 24 wide by 4 feet tall, and they have a hinge in the middle that allows them to open up like a tabletop. They also close like a clamshell, so that it's completely protected on the outside with this layer of plywood, and of course there's plexiglass. Now there's a couple of weird things about how he set these up that I'm going to change, but let me try to pull one of these open and show you what they look like on the inside. All right, here's the frames, and hopefully you can see how he had it organized. Now there's plexiglass right here, which is great. To me, this is kind of odd, but this is how he set it up. He actually took a marker and drew off a grid so that the flaps would sit there. And then you don't see it on this one because this was not one of the frames that was part of the name number set, but he literally had the numbers written here. And when he had a flap from that lodge, he would place it over the number. And in cases where he had a need, then the number would still be visible. Or if there was no issue ever issued, he would have it written on there. He would have the lodge number and he would say no issue. So to me, this was a very odd way to do it, but maybe he had sort of a mathematical mind and this grid system really worked well for him. Again, a couple things I mentioned. We have the accordion deal going on here, so this can close just like that. And you have on the outside kind of this indestructible setup with the plywood. So what I'm going to do to repurpose this is I guess I'm a red felt guy. I don't know, maybe I've been influenced by Chris Jensen's boxware frames. All of my stuff has a red background. So I am going to felt all of that wood and cover up his grid system. The only other thing I've got to figure out is I am not a fan of using tape to hold patches in a frame, especially when the frames are going to be vertical like this. You are always going to have the problem of gravity where the patches are going to want to slide down. He had this problem as well. Even with tape and staples, he had a couple of flaps that had fallen down. So what I may do is actually go to an old trick that I learned. If I can get some kind of a cardboard backing to go between the wood and the felt, what I've actually done is taking, and I know this sounds weird, but it works perfectly. If you take needle and thread, and you literally just put one little stitch in the corner and one little stitch in the corner, just literally one thread, tie it by hand, that will keep the flap from falling, and it is absolutely not noticeable at all, and it also does not affect the patch. One little thread in the corners of the border will keep it in place. Now, it'll take more time to do that. That is time consuming, but if I'm making permanent frames, I think it will work. So the cool thing I want to share about this with you is I got 18 of these frames, which I can't even quite figure out yet how much memorabilia I could display using these frames. It literally just solves a problem that has kind of been on my mind for 5 years of how would I set up my stuff so that I could take it to events and display. So in my mind, I can see having a frame just like National Jamborees, maybe a frame with NOAC, maybe taking certain lodges I collect or conclaves or whatever, maybe senior scouting, merit badges, whatever. I can just create a frame for these different types of things that I collect and then easily take them to any scouting event. So again, one of the reasons why I paid a premium for this collection was because I knew I was going to get the frames, and even though they are literally as old as I am, these frames are probably 50 years old, they work so well and they can definitely be recycled and reused. I love them. So anyways, Scouting How It Finds Insiders, I hope that you enjoyed this video. This is kind of the exclusive content that I promised those of you who signed up to support me with trying to get this podcast going again in 2021 and also trying to get new content posted. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me directly. Again, this is not a video that I'm putting out to the whole world to see. It's more for my insiders, and I hope you enjoyed this Inside the Warehouse piece. Thanks, guys.